Yes, success. Good morning. Good morning. Today is Tuesday, August 12th, 2025. You are tuned in to the Ted Manila Information Show, TMI Show for short, because obviously we bring you way too much information. I am Manila Chan. Ted Rall is still somewhere in the wilderness of Montana. He has yet to descend from the mountains, but we did get proof of life. Ted did survive a night out in the Montana wilderness. He did not get eaten by a bear in skinny jeans. I mean, that is Ted in skinny jeans. So I am running this ship solo today. Producer Robbie also had to be at his real job. So I'm doing this thing solo. Steve Gill will be filling in. He'll be in just a little bit here. Because he's also got a real job. He's like a lawyer or something. So he'll be joining us shortly. If you guys are unfamiliar with Steve Gill, Steve is an attorney. He is the CEO of Gill Media, which is a Nashville, Tennessee-based public affairs media and marketing company. He served previously as the director of intergovernmental affairs for the U.S. Trade Representative Office. And of course, he was one of the former co-hosts of the Final Countdown that we had on Sputnik Radio. So now he's going to fill in just a little bit. We've got a lot, well, not a lot of things to talk about, but a lot of issues. Today's focus is going to be all on Washington, D.C., because it's all the big news that everybody could talk about. We did a lot of talking about the upcoming Alaska summit between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. No word yet if Zelensky is actually getting an invite. I personally would not be surprised if that dude just showed up and literally was a wedding crasher, right? Um, I don't know, because you do have to obviously get clearance if you're going to fly into U.S. airspace from out of the country. You can't just zoom in, zip in, and not get shot down, especially in Alaskan airspace. You can't just fly in unannounced. Some F-16s might politely guide you out. So if for some reason, and this is conjecture on my part, if for some reason Volodymyr Zelensky does show up to Alaska, then on some level, the US government knew it was happening and permitted it. So I hope that's not what happens. None of that. I hope he doesn't come anywhere near the summit and let these two men hash it out. I'll ask Steve when he joins what his thoughts are on that, but that's not going to be the focus today. The focus today is going to be on Washington, D.C. Trump officially overnight activated the National Guard and has usurped power from DC Metro Police for 30 days. That is actually written into law, into code, because remember, Washington, D.C. is not a state. There is no governor that he's usurping power from. He's actually acting within his legal rights, but it is a 30-day limit. So we'll be talking about that, as well as his, I would call it a harebrained idea to just disappear all of DC's homeless. That is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. It has affected an immediate family member, and thankfully for my family, we've worked through that after almost a decade of drug abuse and homelessness with a family member. That person is finally cleaned up, and it took years, but there's just a lack of resources. So I know firsthand from having to deal with that family member, there's a lack of resources. You can't just disappear homeless people because you don't want to see them on your streets. You can't just ship them off to some other locality because it's a blight on the city, as Donald Trump would have it, right? So we'll be talking about that too. So today's focus is all Washington, D.C. based. and it's going to be a short show because I'm alone doing this, and Steve Gill's got a real job. So, with that, I'll get this whole thing going. Steve will join us in probably the next 10 or 15 minutes. So, with that, please remember to hit the like and the subscribe, the follow button, all of that stuff to help the little show, our little show that could continue to grow. And it'll be free. You just hit the subscribe button, and it does a tremendous amount of good for us. We are live Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So please like, follow, subscribe, share, all of that. All right, so let's get into it. It wasn't supposed to be double jaws. But hey, you know. All right. So here's what this looks like. Not Donald Trump. You know what Donald Trump looks like. But this whole thing, this is local news that has become national news for very obvious reasons. Washington, D.C. is not only its own independent city, it's a district, it's not a state. It has millions of people stomping around there in, like, I don't know, all of 5 square miles. And it's the nation's capital. So all eyes are on D.C. right now. This is local news here in Washington. They're out on the ground. So let me just read from the Washington Post newsletter regarding this matter. So, to President Trump, the city where he lives is a hellscape. It is so beset by crime, he said yesterday, that the government must take over policing. He is also sending the FBI to patrol the streets at night. There is no crime surge in Washington. Last year, violent crime hit a 30-year low, but Trump has fretted for decades about urban blight, and he carried that fixation back to the White House. Quote, "If our capital is dirty, our whole country is dirty," he said. Trump began talking about a takeover last week after a prominent member of DOJ was beaten in an attempted carjacking. The president spent the weekend posting online about Washington's dangers. Quote, "Our capital city has been overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged out maniacs, and homeless people." So violent crime, especially murder, did surge after the pandemic. It crested in 2023. Trump says the murder rate is out of control. That's actually not true, at least not right now, not anymore. Homicide and carjackings fell in 2024, and DC police say the city is on track to record even fewer violent crimes this year. The mayor said that she explained this all to Donald Trump several times. So she's had some one-on-one time with Donald Trump. There's the Doge kid, big balls, as it were. I mean, obviously, I know exactly where this is, Swan Street and 15th. It's right center downtown. So, but one persistent problem is youth crime. The number of people under age 18 arrested in Washington, that number rose each year from 2020, start of the pandemic, to 2024. That's according to the White House, although it has actually dipped this year in 2025. Trump warned yesterday about caravans of mass youth rampaging through the city. In an unusual arrangement, federal lawyers prosecute the adults in DC courts, but the local attorneys general deal with the cases for minors. So this is, again, because DC is not a state, it's a city, it's a district. So they kind of have weird rules about how things are done. So the local AGs are the ones who prosecute the crimes for minors, and not only minors, but young adults all the way up to the age of 24. And when they're sentencing, mind you, this is young adults all the way up to age 24. When they get sentenced for crimes, It is always something other than prison, which I guess the Trump administration is frustrated by, because he says, quote, "We're seeing far too much crime being committed by young people, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, that I can't get my hands on." Or excuse me, this is Janine Pirro. She said that. That was her quote. She said that. Um, Washington is among a number of major cities and even some states led by Democrats that let most people who are awaiting trial, they let them out of jail without having to post any bond, any bail. So it's not even no cash bail, it's just no bail. Now, conservatives say that this policy worsens crime by letting lawbreakers roam free. Trump, for example, said that the murderers could be out on no cash bail. That's actually false. Homicide suspects are not eligible for that kind of release. And researchers have found that it doesn't actually lead to more crime. I I would dispute that coming from the Washington Post. They don't actually cite who they're pulling that statement from. But anyway, how is Trump able to do all of this? You might wonder. So I'll get to that. It's called the Home Rule Act of 1973. It lets the city residents, and I used to be a city resident in DC proper, it lets the residents elect the mayor and the city council, but the federal government has, they retain some control. Congress can block local laws, even if had we voted for it, and Congress finds it objectionable, they can block it. It did this in 2023 to reverse a certain crime bill. I can't remember exactly what that was right off the top of my head. And Congress can also attach riders to federal spending bills that restrict how Washington operates, such as in 2023, they ruled Congress ruled against having legalized marijuana sales within district limits, so within the city limits. So while it's allowed elsewhere, like where I live now in Virginia, there are head shops popping up all over the place. Not the case in Washington, D.C. Now, the same law that lets the president take control of D.C. police, this is him wresting control from the mayor. This Home Rule Act allows Trump to do this for 30 days under what they call special conditions of emergency nature. Trump invoked that yesterday. He said that the head of the U.S. Marshal Service will help run the department. So for the next 30 days, that's who I guess the interim, de facto police chief will be. It'll be the U.S. Marshal Service. He said, quote, "If you're soft, weak, and pathetic, I will fire you so fast." That was Trump warning him at the lectern during the press conference. So, Trump is pretty snarky. And so he was warning the U.S. Marshal guy that if he's soft or if he's weak, pathetic, Trump will just fire him. So other federal forces, Trump is unleashing the FBI, the field agents from not the Hoover building, which is the headquarters. He's unleashing the FBI agents from the field office. So there's two offices in Washington, D.C. One is the headquarters at the Hoover building, and then there's another office to which some 100 people or so are posted to that office. Those FBI agents will now have to act as like nighttime security guards. They're going to have to monitor the streets at night. So they'll be reassigned temporarily from that office, from the Washington field office. And the president has now mobilized 800 National Guard troops to help with this effort. And the soldiers, though, they will be focused on logistics and transportation. So Washington residents may not actually see them like we did downtown after J6, right? And to that point, I just want to say that I was downtown during the whole J6 thing. I witnessed all of that. I saw, I lived, it was like probably what, before this war in Gaza, what everyday life for Gazans were like, trying to pass back and forth between like Israel and Israel proper and Gaza. There were checkpoints everywhere. There were armed National Guardsmen. And now I say armed, but I'm going to put that in quotes because the guards that I saw had no magazines in any of their firearms, whether it was their rifle that they, strapped across their chest or on their backs. I looked at all of them. I never saw any magazines actually even on their person, much less like in the rifle. I didn't see any in their pistols either. The pistols, one of them I saw in the metro, and this is again like January of 2021, when Nancy Pelosi unleashed the National Guard onto DC. One of the guards I was looking at, he was close enough to me that I could see into his holstered sidearm. He did not have a mag there was no clip in his firearm. So then I started noticing it everywhere. So I realized it was kind of all theater, and Nancy Pelosi had all this fencing put up all around the city. And that was for like one day. There was rioting on the Capitol one day, and Nancy Pelosi went and brought in all this National Guard and put up this big show of force for one day. And of course, you guys all know the whole conversation about an insurrection and blah, blah, blah. And that went on for, I guess it finally died. We're in 2025, but it took at least this long, right, for it to not be called an insurrection anymore. But that was for one day of crazy behavior. And to Trump's point, he may be far off from, what the numbers actually show. And I'm going to pop these up right here. The numbers actually show that they're down from, let's say, 2020 during COVID, the crimes. Washington, D.C. is right here at the top. If you guys can see, I don't know, maybe I can enlarge it. So this is per capita. Whoops. But violent crime rates in select cities, 2024, crimes per 100,000 residents. So per capita here, Washington, D.C. is in the dark orange. It shows 1,005. That is per capita. The other large cities in the U.S., they show Houston at the top. This is per capita, 1,148. Philadelphia, 909. Phoenix, 800. Los Angeles, I'm kind of shocked by this. Los Angeles, 728. New York City, I'm even more shocked, 671. Chicago, 540. This is all per capita. Columbus, Ohio, that's near where Ted's from, 435. Las Vegas, 430 per capita. That is like physically large cities. Then they go on to compare similar cities in population to Washington. If you look at the staggering number here, Memphis, 2,501 crimes per 100,000 residents. So that is well more than double Washington, D.C.'s crime rates. Detroit, 1,781. Nashville, where Steve Gill is, 1,124. So more crime in Nashville. Denver, 993. Seattle, 775. There's Steve Gill. I said his name, and there he is. I'm going to pop him on the screen. Steve Gill, I already did all the intros and all of that. We're talking about the violent crime. I just said Nashville. So this is a report talking about Trump deploying National Guard here, and wresting control of DC Metro Police for the next 30 days. And it's all, again, and I've said this before, it is all within his legal rights to do so, because the district is not a state. It doesn't have the same rights, and Muriel Bowser is not a governor. She doesn't have, the same say that Gavin Newsom has, right? She can't really complain much. So technically, he can federalize this for the next 30 days. But this is the crimes per capita that we're showing. Washington, D.C. in the dark orange, 1,005. Now, cities similar in population to D.C., where you are, Nashville ranks number 3 if we're going by population head count, 1,124. So you all are actually a little higher in violent crime. What do you say about, well, why isn't Donald Trump calling on the National Guard or whatever to take over Nashville?
Well, as you point out, you can't federalize these cities and states that are not, like District of Columbia, part of a federal entity. So he's got the capacity, the legal right to do that. And you've got Memphis, just a couple of hours away from us, that is the number 1 murder capital in the country. Not Detroit, not Chicago, not some of these other famous cities. Memphis is extraordinarily dangerous in terms of both shootings and fortunately, they have very good medical care, emergency medical care, so you don't have as many deaths as they might otherwise have. Here's the real missing link to this story, and the media pushing forward the idea that DC really isn't that dangerous. By the way, talk about weird political agenda. The DC Democrats are arguing, no, keep our city unsafe. We're going to protest in favor of high crime rates. I mean, Trump derangement syndrome is on display in DC. We'd rather have violence in our streets rather than let Trump solve it. So yeah, let's put that in perspective. Also, the DC police, and there's some stories out today, are acknowledging they have been undercounting violent crimes. They've been pushing down the numbers to make things look better than they are. And they're not counting juvenile crime. These 14, 15, 16-year-old gangbangers that are committing the vast majority of these crimes, those are not being counted. So when you look at those numbers, yeah, double them, because they're not counting about half the numbers that make DC so dangerous, so violent. And then when they do arrest or try to charge these young juveniles, you've got the DC judges letting them out. They're back on the streets almost immediately. Police may not arrest some of these guys because they know they'll be back on the streets before the cops can finish the paperwork. So don't let those DC numbers deceive you. The people in DC know, not the ones protesting on the street saying, keep crime alive. I haven't seen that sign yet, but keep crime alive, baby. It's not hope. It's keep crime alive is the DC Democrats' mantra.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I know, obviously, I've worked in media for the better part of 20 years, and I have lived here for more than half a decade. You as well. You used to live here. You work downtown. You've seen back in the old days, under the what's his name? Barry? Is that his name?
Oh yeah, Marion Barry.
Marion Barry. Under those days, there was a small period of time in the 2010s to the to the 20 teens where DC, and that's when I lived there, DC felt safe. DC was cleaning up. There were no more hookers at the corner of 14th and Mass where I used to live. There was no, I mean, it got cleaned up. It was replaced by pride parades and bars and upscale dining. And towards the end, when I moved out, it started going back to its baseline. It has descended backwards, and you have this juxtaposition of these high-end furniture stores there and these fancy, delicious new restaurants, award-winning restaurants there. But right outside the doors, you have like young people going bonkers out there. And I'm here, right? So I know and having, because you're in and out of here all the time, you're absolutely right. They are undercounting the youth crimes. Oftentimes they just get picked up, and oftentimes they evade police altogether because, lo and behold, teenagers are very fast. I don't know if people know this.
And you're exactly right. You know, the hookers have for the most part moved to K Street, the lobbying center, and the Capitol, and they're just wearing business suits now. So unlike the
Is
ones
that
with the
right?
skirts on the street, the hookers are now official. They're the government employees that are sucking off the taxpayers and the lobbyists who are doing the same.
That's fair. That's fair. But I'm talking about the actual prostitutes that used to be at the corner of 14th Street and in that area of like Thomas Circle where they used to hang out in the 90s. And from what I understand, I obviously didn't live here then. So relative to what it looked like in the 90s under Marion Barry, sure, it looks a lot better. And I know a lot of the Democrats are saying, oh, it's at a 30-year low. But the same way that scientists who can get called biostitutes, right? You can manipulate numbers however you want.
Well, in Manila, it's the same thing that we hear from these same people telling us that if you look at the streets of San Francisco and LA and Oakland, they're perfectly clean and safe. And you see the people literally like zombies that are so drugged up, drug needles and trash everywhere. But if you listen to the left, they say, no, those are perfectly, safe towns. Look at the tourism numbers and you see
Oh my gosh.
the real reality, or look at the video when an ABC or NBC news crew goes out and in some cases have their video carjacked while they're doing a story, for God's sake. So again,
about
don't
crime.
believe the lies, believe our eyes. And again, what we're seeing in DC, and again, I find it absolutely bizarre that the Democrats continue to say, we're going to die on this hill. We're going to defend crime in DC. We're going to defend men and women's sports. We're going to defend all these absolutely ridiculous issues. When you look at every 80-20% issue in polling right now, it's the Democrats flocking to the 20 and wondering why their own poll numbers continue to decline. So yeah, go out, Democrats, defend crime, protest on the streets in favor of criminals, and see how that's going to work out for you with the American public. Now, you're right, as you pointed out earlier. A lot of cities are saying, man, can't he send the National Guard here? Downtown Memphis, Nashville, other cities. You can't do that legally. The cops are going to have to step it up, and judges are going to have to step it up and start actually prosecuting these criminals, including the quote younger ones. A 16-year-old with a gun can kill you just as quickly as a 46-year-old. And yet judges have this, they're just children. What was it? I think Janine Pirro quoted one of them saying, you should go to college. No, don't go to college. Go to jail.
Well, you're absolutely right. And the way I'm not a conservative, but I'm also not a liberal. I'm somewhere in that unsexy middle. I'm a suburban mom first and foremost. I don't care that I was a journalist, a news anchor, that none of that matters. What matters when it comes to safety is that, one, I'm a small female and I'm a mom of a small child. And let me tell you, I do not feel safe taking my kindergartner out past dark in Navy Yard. I do not feel safe taking my family out to the city when it gets dark. I don't want to be there because I've seen the crimes. I've seen them happening. Whether it's, violent with, assault with guns or other deadly weapons, or just petty thefts, or you don't want any of that. I've seen people sitting on the sidewalk at a cafe, just eating their food, and somebody will walk by and snatch their purse. Just poof. Nothing happens.
It's this pack violence that you have to be aware of. Again, when you've got these young thugs in packs of 8, 9, 10, or 12, and they just surround somebody it's like in Africa. You've got one animal that's out from the pack, and the hyenas and the lions come, and they're going to pick the weak link. They're going to pick the one that's somehow solo because they drifted away from their own pack, and that pack jumps them, targets them, and you're seeing, again, in many cases, these young thugs in a pack, beat attack. We saw that in Cincinnati. When you have 8 or 10 people beating one guy on the ground, kicking him in the head,
That's right.
continuing to beat them after they're down, that's what we see so often from these young, violent thugs,
Yeah.
many of them teens. And it's that pack mentality that is the most dangerous. They may not have knives, they may not have guns, but if there's 8 or 10 of them and they've surrounded you, Manila, you have no defense whatever, especially when most of the people around are going to be using their video cameras to record it rather than step in and say no or try to stop it because they know they're outnumbered as well. You also mentioned Navy Yard. It used to be in many of these cities that you just knew what parts of town to avoid. Don't go there
Right.
after dark. Avoid that
Yes.
neighborhood. It's now, no pun intended, bleeding into other neighborhoods, bleeding into these suburban areas, and there are no really safe spots. In many cases, these violent criminals are deciding, wait a minute, we're going to follow the mantra of the old bank robber who asked, "Why do you rob banks?" Pointed out that's where the money is. So why rob somebody in Anacostia, which is the kind of poor, depraved, depressed section of DC? Why not go out to Georgetown and rob people who have money? So what you're seeing is they're moving to the money pots and stealing from people who have a lot more than their neighbors in these poverty-driven neighborhoods.
Yeah. So I mean, I presume I'm with you here on this. Is that with DC city council being upset. This is a quote from them from the local NBC station here. It says, "A manufactured intrusion on local authority." Isn't this just they're just unfortunately using this as a political football? And of course, sure, I would be mad too if I felt like some big wig came in and usurped my power, right? I would feel upset by that suddenly, I've been defanged. But at the end of the day, Trump is within his legal rights to do what he's doing. It is longstanding law. City officials know it. So why are they still crying foul?
Well, and they've had decades to fix it. You don't have a real basis to cry foul when somebody comes in and said, "Hey, daddy's home, we're going to clean things up." When you've had decades to fix it. And what is the common denominator of that entire list of cities, whether it's Nashville, Memphis, and the others? Blue Democrat leadership for decades. And unfortunately, I feel the same way about New York City and Washington, D.C., and Memphis, and to some extent, Nashville as well. You get what you vote for, people. If you vote for the same people who have broken your cities economically, education-wise, from a safety standpoint for decades, and you keep putting the same folks back in charge, I don't have much sympathy for you. You deserve what happens to you. You deserve, unfortunately, what happens to your family members when they're victims of crime, when you have put the same people in who have made the crime situation worse. And I mentioned Memphis. Just this weekend, you had several of the black pastors in Memphis who should be screaming that there ought to be more police control, more police effort, more judges bringing down the hammer on these violent offenders in Memphis. Instead, they're claiming it's a perception problem. Memphis really doesn't have a problem. If the media would stop talking about the shootings, the violence, the robbery, the carjacking, if the media would just stop talking about it, then everything would be copacetic. Everything would be fine. It's a perception problem. Look, if some teenager points a 9mm at my forehead and asks for my wallet or my car, I'm perceiving that I'm in actual danger, and it's not the perception problem of the media telling me that crime is rising in Memphis or Nashville or New York or Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I feel like people are politicizing the lives and safety of the community and the greater good, all because of politics. They just don't want to appear at all remotely like they even support anything that Donald Trump does. I mean, I chastise him when needed, and I applaud him when he deserves it. And people, I mean, I couldn't say you were more right, Steve. I mean, the crime is bad. I mean, it could massively be improved, and I don't see any other way to do this. We've talked about it on the show other days, that you hadn't joined us, but we've talked about the youth crimes. And the problem is, one, where are their parents? Why aren't we punishing their parents? I don't know how you punish. I don't even know where to begin with that. But the parents aren't there, Steve, and there's no infrastructure. What do you do? Because a lot of these crimes, like I said, whether it's just punching people in the face, like for social media, for TikTok, because a lot of it is that too. They're live streaming the debauchery that they're doing in the streets and harassing innocent people and innocent families for social media. They're not getting arrested. Where are their parents? And what could Muriel Bowser, what could she have done?
Well, first of all, it starts earlier than when that, 14, 16, 17-year-old just walks up to a random person on the street, punches them in the face while one of their buddies is videotaping it so that they can put it out on TikTok. We see truancy rates as a common pattern in many of these cities as well. When you have young kids not going to school and falling behind and not having the opportunities that are come from just basic education, that becomes a part of the problem. When you have teen pregnancies where young girls are getting pregnant, out of wedlock at very young ages, they're not reading to their kids. They're not showing up to kindergarten ready to read, ready to know their colors, ready to tie their shoes, because they're being parented by a young teen themselves. And it is,
Right.
Not to play the race card in reverse, but it's not white guys going into the black neighborhoods impregnating these young girls. And because you have such an 80% illegitimacy rate in many of these communities, there's no dad around to say, don't be trifling with my daughter. There's no dad around to punch out some young kid who starts trying to have his way with some 16-year-old girl. So we've lost the fathers, we've lost the education, we've lost the enforcement of the law, and all that combines into the crisis that we're seeing in our major cities. Now, interestingly, the other thing that all these cities have in common is usually an anti-gun approach. Look at Washington, D.C. You're not allowed to carry a gun to protect yourself. You don't have a way to balance things out. So a pack of young thugs come out at you at 8 or 9 of them. You pull out your revolver and pop the first 2. The rest of them will run like scalded dogs. That is not happening in D.C. because you can't protect yourself. And the big equalizer in the Old West, Manila, was that the Colt 45, put everybody on equal footing. A woman your size had the same clout and power with a 45 on her hip as
That's
the big
true.
guy with an axe. So there's no protection allowed in these cities. You don't see this kind of thuggery taking place in rural Tennessee, where the likelihood that with both concealed carry permits, the chance you're picking on somebody who can shoot you helps diminish the likelihood that they pick on the, quote, single person or the guy in the grocery store who's by himself.
Hey, listen, I anchored out in Yuma, Arizona. It is a border town. It is not it's not a place for the weak, we'll say that. But here's the thing. This was in the Jan Brewer days. Arizona is an open carry state. And it is still, and back then it was still the Wild West. And when I would go to Walmart or whatever to see grannies packing heat, you ain't messing with grandma. You're just not. If you're a guy that came across the border illegally or whatever, and you're looking, to pickpocket or purse snatch, you ain't pickpocketing that grandma that's got her sidearm prominently displayed. So that was the first time I'm a Californian. That was the first time that I had lived in a place like that. And believe it or not, I mean, there are a lot of petty thefts and petty crimes there, but believe it or not, violent crime, especially with guns, was not a thing, at least in that time frame. It was not a thing when I lived there because concealed carry, there was a lot of concealed carry. I can't remember exactly if it was permitted back in that era in the Jan Brewer days, but concealed and open carry were wide open, and everybody packed heat. You never knew, like as the kids say, fuck around and find out. Back then, you did not fuck around because you didn't want to find out. You didn't know who was carrying a gun, and oftentimes I would see little old ladies packing heat prominently displayed. And I've asked some of them if they're actually trained, and they said, oh, yeah, because they live out in the desert. They just go practicing in their backyard or whatever. Not a problem. And I go, wow.
You know where you
Okay.
never see any violent crimes, Manila? Gun shows, because everybody's armed to the teeth. You'll have every now and then liberals will say, I went into a coffee shop the other day and there was a guy sitting at the bar, drinking his coffee, having a pie, and he had a gun right on his hip. What does that make you think? It's like, I think that place is not going to get robbed today. Now, I'm a big fan, and I have my permit and the training of concealed carry, because if some guy comes in with a gun, is going to try to rob the place, I want him to shoot the guy that's got a gun displayed. I want to shoot him in the back when he walks past me, because he doesn't know I have my gun on my hip. So again, you have to be kind of wise in your, to me, concealed carry versus open carry. But you remind me of the joke about the little old lady who gets pulled over by the cops, and the cop says, ma'am, you were going a little fast. And she goes, yes, I have my carry permit. Let me tell you, I have a 9mm handgun in the glove box. He goes, fine, as long as it stays there, we'll be fine. And I have a 357 Magnum in my purse. And he kind of chuckles and says, okay, that's good. She goes, and I have a Beretta strapped to my ankle. And he goes, okay. And she goes, and I have an AR-15 in my trunk. And he goes, anything else? She goes, well, I have this knife also in my purse. And the cop's chuckling. He goes, ma'am, what are you afraid of? And she goes, not one damn thing.
Those were the grandmas in Yuma, Arizona. I can tell you. I can tell you from firsthand experience. And you do not, at least when I lived there in the 2010s, in the early 2010s, the stuff that we see daily in Washington, D.C. was not happening. Just, it didn't happen. And Steve, people were politer on the streets, in the cars. There was no road raging. There were no people flipping the birds. People held the door for you. And nobody, their bar brawls were few and far. People were quicker to de-escalate. I'm not
they're
surprised by that.
comparing their weapons. They're saying, man, is that a Ruger? Is that a Beretta? It's like they're complimenting each other's gun choices and saying, I've been thinking about getting that. What should I get for my wife? Well, I prefer the 38 special air weight for my wife, because it's a revolver. so something's going to come up. You're not going to run the risk of it jamming if it's a semi-automatic. By the way, I did a piece yesterday on London TV, and they were talking about crime and guns, and there had been a shooting, and they referred to it. I'd never heard this term before, an auto loader, and I'm going, what's an auto loader? And then I go, oh yeah, that's a semi-automatic, but they referred to it as an auto loader rather than a semi-automatic gun, which I've heard that term before.
I've never heard that term either. Now, tangentially related, we got 15 more minutes. I want to get through this portion as well, because you can't talk about violent crime without the homeless population, for obvious reasons, I would say. But they are related. A lot of the crime happens. I would say less violent crime, but crime nonetheless is perpetrated by homeless people that are on drugs. So I'm gonna read this one here. It says, on any given night, there are close to 4,000 people experiencing homelessness in the nation's capital, a city of roughly 700,000, according to the Community Partnership, an organization working to combat homelessness there. The organization says that while most of the homeless people are in transitional housing or emergency shelters, roughly 800 or so, maybe 1,000, are without shelter. Trump announced in a Truth Social post the suggestion of part of a larger push for beautification of the Capitol is for targeting crime is to, let's say, relocate the homeless population. Quote, the press conference on crime and beautification will be held tomorrow. So this either it's happening today or it happened yesterday. I can't remember. And will not only involve ending the crime, murder, and death in our nation's capital, but will also be about cleanliness and the general physical renovation and condition of our once beautiful and well-maintained capital. Trump added that Washington Mayor Muriel Bowser is, quote, a good person who has tried, but she has been given many chances and the crime numbers get worse and the city only gets dirtier and less attractive. Now, the numbers have not gotten worse, but it doesn't mean that the crime isn't actually worse. Just a technicality. Trump added that, quote, before the tents, squalor, filth, and crime, Washington was the most beautiful capital in the world. It will soon be that again. President Trump on August 10th suggested removing homeless people from Washington to make the nation's capital, quote, safer and more beautiful than it ever was before. On a Sunday post on Truth Social, Trump shared several photos showing tents and garbage on the streets and areas around the Capitol, saying, quote, the homeless have to move out immediately, all caps. We will give you places to stay, but far from the Capitol. The criminals, you don't have to move out, Trump added. We're going to put you in jail where you belong. It's all going to happen very fast, just like the border. The president warned to, quote, be prepared, adding, there will be no Mr. Nice Guy. What do you think about that, Steve?
Well, I think first of all, with the homeless situation, we keep trying to fix it by providing residences or shelters or homes. There are some people who, are one, paycheck away from being, out of their home, out of their apartment. There's no question about that. There are families that lose their job and then have no place to stay.
Through no fault of their own.
That is a different situation from the mentally ill and the hopelessly drug addicted. And housing is not going to solve the homeless addiction, the homeless mentally ill problem. So when we come up with these temporary shelters, when we come up with turning hotels into quote homeless shelters, putting families and those who are literally a shower and a first month's rent away from not being homeless again, those are very easily solvable. You could almost do a loan program where we're going to take somebody, pay that first month, last month rent, get them, their family into an apartment, and then over time they repay that first month, last month rent. So you then provide that to somebody else. That revolving door of funds would do a lot to solve that problem of the temporary homeless, the economic homeless. The mentally ill and the drug addicted, that's an entirely different problem. And putting them into those shelters with families, with decent people is not the answer either, because that then turns into a crime haven and ruins those facilities where you have people not wanting to go into the homeless shelter or the homeless facility because it's dangerous for decent people to be there. So you really have to, divide this into two different categories. When we decided we weren't going to keep mentally ill people in hospitals, when we decided that the drug addicted could decide whether to keep taking their drugs, when the mentally ill could decide, well, I don't like the way I feel when I take my medication, so I'm going to be yelling at people on the streets and doing that. When we decided to tolerate and enable drug addiction and mental illness, this is where the problem exploded. And isn't it interesting, Manila? We never get these stories. We never hear this much when Democrats are in charge. We didn't hear much about homelessness when Joe Biden was president. We didn't hear much about homelessness when Barack Obama was president. Whenever a Republican is back in office, that's when it's a crisis. That's when it's a big deal, and we've got to solve it right now. It's as big a deal under other administrations because we never approach it in the right way. And let me mention this, this tent business of homeless just, pitching tents, on any green spot in our cities. The fact that you're homeless doesn't allow you to simply take public property. It is not your property. It is our property. And simply homesteading on it, because that's where you choose to pitch your tent. They ought to take down the tent, take the stuff. And if they don't have a tent and they don't have stuff, they will move on. We need to clean up those areas because that is public property. Those are public parks, not homeless, encampments, which they've become. And then my son, Ryan, who's now 30 years old and a dad and married to his wife down in Auburn, He was going to grad school out in Colorado for a while, and we were in Denver at one point, and you had these tents that were everywhere. And he pointed out that if we go fly fishing in a national park in Colorado, there's limits on when you can go into the park and pitch your tent to camp. But you can just go pitch your tent anytime in Denver, a blue city, Democrat-run city. You can just pitch your tent anywhere you want, anytime you want. So we're putting more restrictions on people going and enjoying our national parks than we do on somebody wanting to enjoy a small park in a downtown city. And the other point he made is you're seeing these homeless people, literally defecate in the front of businesses, defecating on the
God,
streets.
yes.
If I'm walking my dog and I don't pick up my dog's poop, it's a $25 fine. But we got the liberals telling people, well, if that guy poops in front of your business, isn't it a pathetic situation? Shouldn't we be compassionate and sympathetic? No. If I have to pay $25 if I don't pick up the poop from my greyhound, then you ought to have jail time if you poop in front of somebody's business.
Yeah, this is. I mean, I have a guy I know back home in downtown LA. He owned a barber shop, and he literally picked up and moved to Moscow during COVID, the start of COVID. I think he's ethnically, from that area anyways, but he's American. He got so tired of fighting the mayors and city council in downtown LA because of the homeless crisis. And they were constantly sleeping in the cutout to his business way, to the door, sleeping there, urinating and pooping right there in front of his barbershop door. He said, you know what? I'm tired of this. I'm done. I want to move to a country where I can do business and people, still have values and whatever. And he decided to pick up and move to Moscow. And I'm not saying he's like one generation removed. I think he's multi-generations removed ethnically Russian, but we're talking 200-300 years worth of immigration for this particular guy and his family. But he decided he wanted to go try the ancestral home, and he went there for a little bit and decided, I'm setting up shop. I'm going to become a citizen. And he says he's so much happier there because Putin is tough on crime. He's strict, and the local mayors and municipalities, you don't have this that we see all over Washington, D.C., all over, we see all over Los Angeles, that I've seen, Steve, from RT America's old offices, right smack downtown, 1 block away from the White House. I have seen countless mentally ill homeless people lean up against any old office wall when no one's looking and take a big dump.
And you mentioned Moscow. I've been to Moscow and St. Petersburg and Samara, another large Russian city, a couple of times as an election observer in the last couple of years. And again, Americans have this false perception of Russia kind of in black and white cinder block buildings, from the 70s, empty grocery stores. And the media has done a remarkably poor job of telling the truth of what Moscow and Russia is today. But you're exactly right. Whether it's the mayors, whether it's the president, a woman can get off the subway in downtown Moscow at 2:00 in the morning and is perfectly safe.
Yep.
I did not see a cigarette butt on the street. I did not see a homeless person laying on the street. The streets were pristine and clean, and the people were well dressed. It is decidedly different than what you see in our major cities in the U.S. And yet the media here does not share that because, well, it doesn't fit the Russia, Putin agenda. That Russia is horrible. Again. I've seen it with my own eyes, and I wish more media would go show what it actually looks like, what it is actually like. It's safe, it's secure, it's clean. Because you mentioned the homeless crisis. You stop a crisis from beginning by not tolerating it at the beginning. We have tolerated this to the point that it has become a crisis. And in Russia, in other major cities, around the world. I was in Istanbul not long ago. Again, you don't have people pooping on the street in these other major cities around the world because they would not tolerate it. We have tolerated it because there's this liberal, we have to be compassionate, we have to embrace bizarre sick, disgusting behavior. And if you stop tolerating it, it will stop.
Well, Steve, look, we in America have had this overcorrection. My dad, my late father, worked in mental health. I grew up in that community. Being from Los Angeles, and we've always had a homeless crisis out in Los Angeles, and I'm very, very sympathetic to the homeless population. And part of what I saw changing, at least at the LA County level, was because it's always, I mean, California up and down the state is blue through and through and through and through and through. And one day, when somewhere in the late 80s, they decided, and I think you mentioned this earlier, they decided that that even mentally ill people, they sure, of course, they have civil rights or whatever, but they know better for themselves. We should let them have a say. It is not okay to to have your family member, your cousin, your cousin Bobo, or your boyfriend's mom committed. You can't do that. You might be able to do a 5150 hold for a day or two, and then they get released on their own recognizance because maybe they're having a lapse, and from there on, let's just say from when Bill Clinton entered Washington D.C. From there on, we started seeing massive defunding of state and local mental health facilities. We saw massive closures, one by one by one by one, of institutions where these people would otherwise have been able to go in the 60s and the 70s. Now, I'm not saying we should go lobotomize all of these people like we did, in the movies from the 1950s and 60s, or like the one Kennedy daughter, right? At this point, I guess the Kennedy sister, right? One of JFK's younger sisters was lobotomized famously. That's a well-known case now. I'm not saying that's what we do to these people, but I think it's more inhumane for this. I mean, look at what we're seeing. This is in Washington, D.C. I think it's more inhumane to have them suffer on the streets like this, hungry, dirty, and maybe not this particular lady, but there are others who are violent, who will throw feces at. I've seen all of this, by the way. It's not stories I'm just making up. Will throw feces at you as you're walking by. There are needles. For everybody's safety. This poor lady has probably been raped by other homeless people. It is not humane to have people on the street. So, I know Trump is probably a bad maybe a bad messenger in the way he's saying it, right? He's like, "Oh, we're going to clean it up." And it sounds awful, but if it's possible for him to institute some sort of mode to help these people, they don't want to be on the street. I don't know what Democrat in California continues to argue that because they have civil rights, even though they're not in the right state of mind, they're out of their gourds. Sure, they have civil rights, but you think this is more humane? You think it's more humane for the dog to be out there eating garbage too? For all those that, if you don't care about homeless people, you care about animals, the PETA folk. Is this more humane? So Trump, again, I think maybe appears as a the wrong messenger for this particular topic, but the net result, if he's able to properly execute this, I think is good for everybody. It's good for the suburban moms like me who are literally, when we go to parks, when I take my son to parks or to go play on a slide or whatever, I don't let him step into the sand pit area until I literally kind of survey the area and kick around the sand and make sure there's no needles. I literally have to go survey the area before I even let him onto the playground. I shouldn't have to live like that. And these people shouldn't have to live like this. And it really had begun with these Democrat-led liberal cities where they decided to say, "Oh, well, this is a civil rights and a personal rights issue. Like everybody should be able to get an abortion. Everybody should be able to live on the streets if they want." But to me, that's not humane. This is not how a modern civilization should be presented anywhere. Moscow, I know because I have obviously a lot of connections to Moscow. They have facilities outside of the city limits. If they see somebody on the street more than, fine, if you're a drunk for a day or two, you sober up and then you stagger home. I'm talking about the chronically homeless like this. They have facilities where the cops will pick you up. They will cart you outside of the city. They will clean you, bathe you, feed you, and put you in whatever program, whatever mental help program you need. And voila, and they will rehabilitate you. If you need help finding a job, they'll take you to another city where there's hiring for this or that or whatever. They'll put you to work. America has kind of lost its way with that because we don't care. And like you said, families have fallen apart, churches have fallen apart, the whole us as a community have fallen apart, and these people fall by the wayside, and then moms like me with small children end up getting stuck with, Hep B needles at the park.
Well, and we've let the rights of the mentally ill, the rights of the drug addicts trump the rights of citizens to live in a clean, safe environment. And their rights don't trump your rights as a mom or my rights to be able to walk through a park and not be accosted or, like you said, have people throw feces at you or yell at you because they're mentally ill. And we need to acknowledge that, look, saying, oh, these people have a right to make decisions for themselves. Look, if your child decides they want to eat ice cream 24 hours a day, they're not in the right position to make those decisions. And these mentally ill and drug addicted are not in the right mental capacity to make decisions for themselves any more than we let a young child make bad decisions for themselves. So if they want to make bad decisions, we have the right to say, no, we're not going to let you hurt yourself. We're not going to let you hurt others. And it's time to, again, restore that balance in our communities.
Here. I'm all for compassion for these people, and it's not compassionate to let them be on the streets like this. That is not compassionate to not help them, and it's not compassionate for, all these grifting organizations that say they help the homeless people when the president of XYZ homelesshelp.com, right? They're making $600,000 a year, and pennies from the dollar that are donated get grifted. There's not enough regulation. I mean, this whole infrastructure around how we deal with the mentally ill, the homeless, the drug addicted, it is shot. We need to start all over. So I don't know what Trump is going to say in terms of outlining what to do, because there are millions of people, Steve, millions, and some of them, a good portion of them, are veterans. Millions of people across America are in this position: mentally ill, homeless, and drug addicted. Many of them are veterans. I would love to see what Trump is going to present. So I'm withholding judgment on him there. I get what he's trying to say. I think he's a bad messenger, but I get it. So I guess we're going to have to wait and
I want to
see.
see us allocate our resources instead of spending, tens of billions of dollars on illegal aliens in this country. Let's devote those resources to the homeless veterans. Let's devote those resources to healthcare for our veterans. Let's actually devote those resources to people who have earned our help, our compassion, our finances, not those who have broken into our house and then demand that we pay for their college tuition. We demand that they be fed. They demand that we provide health care. No, you break into my house, you go to jail. Let's devote our resources to helping those who deserve help.
I can tell you from firsthand experience. I was talking about this at the top of the show. I had a family member who was chronically homeless. They had, battles in and out with addiction for years. U.S. citizen, but when he decided to finally, clean up his act, and I was there for years to try to help him, and he was over in California. Steve, I couldn't tell you how many times I tried all these different programs for years, and like the Salvation Army, for example, and other other groups. And in California, I was told he had to be waitlisted because there was an influx of illegal migrants who were using the resources, and they were getting EBT cards. And here's this my family member who's a citizen who needs help and is ready to seek help, couldn't get the help because the resources were being drained, whether it's health insurance, whatever. There, I mean, not even, this is somebody that had to live in a tent because of he made some bad life choices, and he knows that. And he's come full circle now. Fast forward, not everybody has a Manila that's a relative, right? That was going to continue to show love and compassion and prayer for his soul, and for God to help walk him through that fire. And thank God, after I don't know, 6 or 7 years of my acting as a caseworker, he is now thankfully living a good, clean, sober life, a good Christian life in Texas, off the streets of California, where we were, so Steve, my point is you are not bullshitting. It is true. The illegal migrants were taking, really, literally taking the roof from his head that should have been going to him as an American, and the food from his mouth that should have been going to him as an American. He was not put first during the Biden administration and the Newsom administration in California. Newsom and Biden gave preferential treatment to the people that freshly came over the border, and my family member was one of those discarded Americans. So I saw it firsthand. I know. So you're absolutely right. They're going to say, oh, Steve Gill's a conservative. He's a right winger. And no, I'm not any of those things. And I witnessed it firsthand. I walked through it with my family member, and I had to never lose faith. And like I said, I don't talk about religion very much on the show, but as a Christian, that is something that's why it's called faith, right? I had no reason, I had no proof that this was ever going to work. I had no proof that something was going to come through, but on faith, I stuck it out and kept pushing, and finally, through the Salvation Army, also a Christian organization, and their help, it finally worked. And it does work. It does work if you can push through and find the right kind of help. And we need more help like the Salvation Army. So when you guys see them every Christmas ringing that bell with the red bucket, it really, really does help. I always donate to them, but we need more people like that, more organizations like that, Steve. And the governors like Governor Newsom, they need to have a wake-up call. He's on his way out, but all of these Democratic leaders, there's no coincidence why you see tent cities in Democrat-controlled areas. I'll give you the last word.
And I would say that the Salvation Army is one of those to hold up, because they, if you put $1 in that bucket, almost all of that dollar is going to go to help somebody. It's not going to go to some fancy office building or to paying exorbitant salaries to their executives. So if you want the biggest bang for your bucks when you're looking at charities, Salvation Army is certainly one that I would encourage people to put a few dollars in that bucket at Christmas time.
Yeah, I'm so with you on that. I have firsthand experience dealing with them, so I'm with you on that. But yeah, I'm curious to see what Trump does. Don't trust the media hoopla, everybody, about what's happening in DC. It is not fascism. It's actually written into law. If Barack Obama cared enough to try to clean up the city, then he could have done it. It's written into law within the president's rights to do what Donald Trump is doing. Anybody could have done it if they cared enough to try to fix the crime rates. Like in 2008, if Barack Obama wanted to do that rather than put kids in cages, he could have done it. So don't trust the hype is the main message I want to put out there. And for Steve Gill, who obviously was in and out of the city all the time, even still, and worked here for many years, and I live out here. Don't trust the hype. Don't trust this media hype. It's not. He's not usurping power. It's not fascism. It's written into law that POTUS has the power to do this. So that is that. I'm more anxious, Steve, about Friday's big Alaska talk. So this to me is like Oh, shut up, liberals. Like, fine, you go get robbed. Like you go get sexually accosted coming off the metro. You go do that. I'm going to focus on something that actually matters, like the Alaska summit.
Yeah, world peace. let's put
How
that
about that?
ahead of the let's defend criminals in D.C. And I'm somewhat hopeful that when President Trump and President Putin meet face to face, that Trump can get the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth that is blocked away from him. When some of his advisors who have a financial interest, a business interest, an economic interest
Right.
in this war continuing. I saw a chart just yesterday where one of the top military munitions companies in Germany is seeing their stock plummet because they're seeing peace may be at hand. And that should be the big red flag that tells us, why is Germany, why is France, why is the United Kingdom, why is the US continuing to push a war where Ukrainians are suffering, Russians are suffering, young men of military age in Ukraine are fleeing their country to avoid being conscripted and thrown to their deaths. Why is it that the European Union and the DC establishment keep pushing this war? It's because you got to follow the money. And I was actually looking up a few of the quote generals, retired generals that are frequently on Fox, thinking, okay, what's their financial interest? And for example, General Jack Keane, who's one of the big warmongers on Fox all the time, the guy works for the Institute of I think it's the Institute of Peace. And you look at where their funding comes from, much of it comes from the military industrial complex. He's also the chairman of a company that makes Hummers and other military vehicles. I wonder why Jack Keane would have such an interest in continuing to promote the sale of weapons, munitions, and an ongoing war in Ukraine. As always, follow the money.
I will make that the last word. Steve Gill, always appreciate when you can step in or when you join us. Steve, is there a website, anything else you want to promote that you got going on that, I said at the top, I gave them your resume, any place they can go check out anything you're doing?
We've just launched a new statewide media site here in Tennessee, TriStar Daily, TRI stardaily.com. And we've been up about 3 weeks. We're drawing tens of thousands of views in just the first couple of weeks. We're rattling the cages and shaking things up here. So encourage people to go regularly to tristardaily.com if you want the insight of not just politically, but what's happening economically and sports-wise and everything else in Tennessee.
I like it. Thank you so much, Steve. We'll say goodbye to everybody. Make sure you guys go check out tristardaily.com, right? .com.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. Adios,
Thanks,
amigos.
Manila.
We're out of here.
Thanks.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. Bye.